you can absolutely do whatever it is you want to do, but there's nothing to me more important than networking. And something that I quite often say is your network is your network.
Dion St, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on today.
Cool, man. Thanks for having me.
Vibes. So why don't you start off telling us kind of where you're originally from and kind of what you're up to these days, and then we'll sort of dive into your journey.
Sure. Originally, I was born in the States, in New York. Early on, moved back to the Caribbean where both of my parents are from, an island called Dominica. I was about like 3.5 or so. So I lived there up and went to school there up until through college. At college time, I left Dominica and went to Florida Tech where we met. Interestingly, I guess in high school, I used to swim competitively. So I know you've had a previous podcaster with you, Cecil. We share that in common. So we used to swim at Florida Tech sometimes randomly, find random pools to swim in. So Florida Tech was a great experience learning. It was fantastic networking. I appreciate the global reach that it has given us. It's really
absolutely
quite unique. After Florida Tech, I was actually recruited directly to Microsoft, where I worked for about a decade. And then now I am a freelance software engineer, if you will. Most of my focus is on application modernization and the cloud, etc. And then in my spare time, I have a event production company. We do stuff actually globally. We do stuff throughout the Caribbean, in the United States, and other places as well. There's other opportunities that are always developing, but
yes,
quite an interesting networking opportunity as well. So there's a lot that goes into that. So we can discuss whatever you want.
Fantastic. So I'm excited that you highlighted dual careers. So I'll probably we'll dive into that for sure. So let's begin with, we do the show to encourage people from the Caribbean region to pursue data-driven careers. You are more on the software side, not necessarily, let's say, data science, et cetera, et cetera. However, none of this stuff can run without the cloud and the applications that you sort of work on. So what do you think, or what's your perspective on the future of tech in the Caribbean and what it's going to do to that region, and what should people be paying attention to, both technical and non-technical?
Yeah, well, I think it's quite clear, right? It needs to start with the cloud, because when you and I were growing up, if you wanted to, start Facebook, you needed to get massive servers, engineers, and tons of knowledge on stuff that you didn't have access to. So now, let's say you and I decide we're gonna create a new Facebook. We just design it to run in the cloud. So, that's a tremendous opportunity. And now you can reach customers globally, not just, on your very slow, very unstable Caribbean third world network connection. So this is a really, really amazing opportunity for, the Caribbean in general to be able to connect to that global infrastructure that is unlimited, right? And, create apps that could be worth millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars.
I want to dive into something, you mentioned unlimited. Can you maybe expand on that and what that means for people at home? Because I think when we oftentimes think of a business in the Caribbean, okay, if you're in Trinidad, that's your sort of local market. You might think about branching out to other islands. And I like that you said, think of global customers, not necessarily, hey, the next island up the road, et cetera, et cetera. So what does unlimited sort of mean? And in addition, what's one thing people should be thinking about to break the paradigm of, hey, my next clientele are just coming from the other islands? But, just breaking that mindset.
I think that's huge. And I think it's great that you highlighted that, because quite often we dive into this very typical conversation as how can we do things better in the Caribbean? How can we better service the diaspora? The diaspora is what we seek to bridge that gap to with the local, right? But really and truly, that's a global market. So you can have an idea that doesn't even have to relate to Caribbean culture, and that company can be based anywhere.
Yes.
And what I mean by unlimited is these cloud services power the most powerful and successful businesses in the world, the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Facebooks, the Microsoft clouds, Googles, the Bing, Hotmail, Skype, Zoom, Instagram, like all of these things are powered by the same cloud service that you can tap into. So a well-engineered solution can scale infinitely. So it's more power than you need. It's really that simple. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but Amazon AWS is an accident. Amazon was building all these servers to facilitate what they were doing, and then they found a better way of developing software. Instead of building software for a box, they started building services that they could use to enable their designs and their applications to run. And then they were like, wait, this is more power than we need. So let's sell it. You know? So then they started selling it, and then everybody started, oh, well, we can just use Amazon stuff. And then, you know, for a while, Walmart and other type companies were using Amazon stuff to build their global infrastructure. And then Walmart realized something. Oh, wait, this is how Amazon is able to beat us on price point, is because they're subsidizing their products by selling cloud services. So then everybody's thinking like multi-business, right? So Amazon isn't an e-commerce business. Amazon is a business that delivers you the solution that you need right now for whatever it is you're trying to do. Amazon is basically just trying to streamline everything. Like Amazon is a logistics business, for example. So Walmart was like, oh, wait, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We need to move off this cloud. So now it moved a little bit to Google's cloud, it moved a little bit to Microsoft's cloud, and now they have like multi-cloud, and they still have some footprints on Amazon to balance it off, you know, just in case. But that's not where they want to put all their eggs, because they realize that they're strengthening their competitor. So, you know, there's a lot of politics and dynamics that happen behind the scenes of this. But the point is, like, there's more power there than we as a Caribbean could use for our population.
Understood. And what do you think is the biggest barrier to entry for folks at home that prevent them from maybe thinking about the cloud?
Imposter syndrome.
Okay.
Like, you know, feeling that you don't belong, or you can't, or you shouldn't. I mean, you literally can just wake up and do it. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. And if you don't know how to do it, you can just Google it. Stack Overflow is very easy to follow. And, you know, more specific than that, let's say you can't afford some training program, which I do recommend a lot of these online training programs.
Okay. Are you a fan of, well, you're from Microsoft, so I guess, I mean, I'll put you in that position.
Fan of what? What is it?
In terms of which cloud trainings you find to be more rigorous, let's just leave it there. Either AWS, even though they're sort of application specific to those particular environments?
They're the same. I mean, it's apples to apples, pretty much. I find that previously people who are anti-Microsoft would prefer AWS, right? It's more Linuxy, it's more hardcore, you know, but the Microsoft stuff is become very, very open source and cross-platform. So that's not even really a thing anymore, especially when you move to like the new ways that applications are built and hosted, Docker, etc. The new .NET platform, which is actually being architected by one of our college colleagues, David Fowler.
Oh,
he's
okay.
the architect of .NET Core, which
like
is
architect.
He's that guy. You know, is transforming it to the open platform so you can run .NET Core on everything. So, I mean, Microsoft has come a long way. They've open sourced a lot of their source code. So everything is becoming more cohesive. Microsoft is becoming less Apple-y, if that makes sense. Whereas like, you know, walled gardens and stuff, it's more about productivity and driving customer results. But you can learn about all of these things easily with just Google searches and YouTube, like for free. You can learn all of this stuff for free. People are putting this information, very, very solid trainings out there for free, just so that they can get more subscribers and followers and views. So
yes,
you know. So
now you have me thinking I should do a show called like YouTube Millionaires, like who's learned just from YouTube and gone off and and done some cool stuff.
So many people. Let's not even talk about these NFT kits.
Yeah. Well, no. Trust. You'll get there. Trust. So in the first segment of the show, we like to kind of deep dive into your career journey. So we'll start in high school. So you went back home from the US to Dominica, and you sort of spent your formative years there, and you were a swimmer. But tell us what you were like in high school. Okay. And I typically put the example. What were your strengths and weaknesses? I was a slacker in high school. To some degree, I assume you were the same just because I saw, maybe how much you partied, but, correct me if I'm wrong.
Many have failed, like literally failed out of school following me. Like at Florida Tech, I know at least like half a dozen people who were hanging out with us and failed out of school because I always took my school very seriously. I was always a great student. Always put in the time. So, when I'm hanging out, you better believe that my work is already done.
I see. I would have never known that.
Well, exactly. Just like where does he find the time?
Okay.
So, but that kind of mantra has led me through my life. I like to have a lot of fun, maybe too much, and I like to work really hard. So
yes,
there's those two things that go together.
Yeah, I think you're a great example of that. And in high school, you were quite diligent as well. Do you think that had something to do with sort of the rigors of swimming? Because I knew a couple of folks that used to swim, and very, very early morning workouts, you're swimming for like an hour and a half. So you get to school, you're super tired, and I guess you have X amount of energy to devote to whatever it is that you have to do, right?
Yeah. So in Dominica, we swim in the evenings, so after school. But it was a lot to do with just like my family and my upbringing. I mean, my parents were pretty strict. I was, my friends used to make fun of me because I used to have to be in bed by 8 p.m. on a school night. What? I wasn't allowed to watch TV during the week. Yeah, a lot of stuff like that. So, I come from a pretty structured background.
I see. And you're a software engineer. And were you always into computers and coding in high school? You were?
Coding, not so much. I learned to code a little bit in Dominica, but I wasn't great at it. Most of that I learned actually at Florida Tech. Actually, when I came to Florida Tech, I wanted to be a computer engineer.
I see.
And when I came for my meeting with the faculty head, I remember he was just so dull and boring, and he's really like his English was hard to understand. And then I don't even remember his name. And then I walked into Dr. Schoff's office.
Yes.
And there was like SpongeBob's everywhere, and he was just like laid back, like surfer dude. He had ponytail. He was chill and cool, and I was like, yeah, I like this guy. So it was literally just that. Like we had more of a connection, and I went with it. And here's an interesting fact. So a few years later, I told him about this. When I came to his office, I saw that he had some, we were having a meeting, and he had some of his things, some of the teddies and dolls and stuff in a box. I'm like, oh, you cleaning out a little bit? He's like, let me be honest with you, Dion. I hate this stuff. Just one day, some kid left one here by accident. Like one of the kids was touring, like his baby sister or something left like a SpongeBob or a Patrick list. And people just started bringing me more and more and more.
Oh, really?
None of these were ever mine.
Whoa.
So then I told him the story of how I ended up switching my major. And he's like, wow. And he actually put him back.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So, well, it's interesting because that brings me, I guess, forward a little bit to a conversation I was having with one of my senior directs at Microsoft. And it's like, you're more influential than you think. And you may not quite understand what you're doing that's influencing somebody else. So don't take yourself for granted because you are more influential than you think.
So there's experience. We'll come to the Microsoft part because I think you specifically actually had a big hand to play in me going forward to do my PhD and not necessarily.
Really?
Oh yeah. And that story is like definitely a hard hitting one for me when I had come to interview at Microsoft. So we'll hop into it at that time.
Okay. You see, so I didn't know that, and you never know who you're inspired, man. That's crazy.
Absolutely. So you get to Florida Tech, and how did you sort of choose Florida Tech? That's a very nuanced school out of all the different schools in the US.
it's a sore topic. So I wanted to be a Gator. Actually, I really wanted
in
to be
Florida,
a Gator.
University of Florida. Okay.
I had been offered a scholarship to swim.
Whoa, and that's
My
a big
parents,
swimming school too, right?
yeah,
That's like the
exactly.
top school.
I was a national swimmer. I was pretty decent, and my mom and dad were like, "That's a party school, and it's too far away. We want you to be on the evacuation path in case there's like a hurricane or something." Because my family actually moved to West Palm when I came up here to go to school. So my sister and my family lived in South Florida. So yeah, they wanted me to be closer and go to a more academic
school.
Yeah. The other thing about Florida Tech is like, I remember like all these interviewers used to come, like they used to have like these career days.
Yes.
Like, why is everybody's GPA so low? Like Florida Tech is just hard. It was just hard all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, my GPA was decent, but like you don't see people walking like we all didn't graduate with like 3.8s. Like most people are just like just like 3.2, just a little higher. Like
yes,
that's where most people are, and that's pretty low for college. Because when you look at other people, like most people are like 3.8, 3.9, summa cum laude and all these things are more easy to achieve, especially for us coming from the Caribbean. I feel like we have a pretty strong academic background.
Right. And given that you're a fairly strong academic student, very rigorous, and you're still coming up with that. Yeah, Florida Tech was definitely a quite rigorous school. And I think even balancing that with not as much distractions as a big party school, I think it was quite an interesting mix. So you always have to keep pushing. So you're in computer science.
Also, we had to work harder to party at Florida Tech. We had to create our own fun.
Yes. And yeah, we could probably dive into that as well, because I think there's an energy manufacturing component. And when I say energy manufacturing, a big part of how I've observed your career and by proxy observed my own career so far is the energy that you bring to the people that you meet. And I think maybe having to probably cultivate that environment for us to enjoy ourselves, you come into like a half-dead environment with a bunch of people, but you can ignite life into it, So with that said, you start doing computer science. So you start computer engineering might be boring because of whoever you sort of met. Now you decide, all right, time to start coding. Tell us about that journey. What was school like? Typically, your junior years is one where you definitely want to quit. And how did you sort of shift your mindset over that time? Or were you just gung-ho and you just kind of plowed through?
Yeah, I want to say something. If there's any academics from the Caribbean listening to this, from a strictly academic standpoint, we need to introduce algebra into the CXC curriculum. Like, It is ridiculous that we get to like college and it's like I had to do what I would consider remedial math, trigonometry and algebra and these things I just was not strong in. That was not part of CXC, and I left the islands with a bunch of ones, a couple twos, and 1 3 in chemistry. Like I had like ones and twos in like advanced maths, physics, computer science. You name it. So just coming to the States and going through like the SAT program, and I feel like we need to be better prepared for those things as well, because it's a global economy, and this goes back to I guess my previous point about siloing ourselves into where we are and where we came from and what we know. We need to open our horizons.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you bring that up. So what you're saying is we are grooming every generation for a Caribbean scope, and that's about it to some degree, right?
Well, I think it's more just like Her Majesty's scope, so we are all like Commonwealth. We have, Victorian etiquette and all these nice things, but the world is much bigger than that. And I think we can see that England is not really a global leader in technology, science. I mean, the stuff that we're discussing today.
That makes sense. And I always wondered, at least at home, and this is probably very true in everywhere outside the US, in terms of SAT preparation. Because if you actually did pretty well in the SATs, that's like a ticket to lots of different opportunities as well. And if they had started you from, 14 years old and you're doing like little SAT stuff like along the way, you might kill it. by the time you're 17 or 18 to head off to college, right?
I mean, I think that the CXC preparation is sufficient for most of it.
Okay.
But it doesn't include the specific bits that I just mentioned just now.
Mm-hmm.
So we can get stronger now because our writing was very strong.
Your writing was strong, right? All right, nice. Real pressure.
Well,
I think I always struggle with that.
Well, this is funny. Like on my first semester in college, I really struggled with writing, and I was like, "How? I've been a straight A English student since the beginning of time," and they're like, "Bro, your grammar is terrible. You're putting commas all over the place."
Oh yeah, there's trying commas.
Commas slices kill me. So like I think all of that is learning and spelling too.
Oh yeah. Well,
like
thank God for computers, right?
Things like that.
Oh, true story. Yeah, that was definitely a struggle.
Yeah.
So you're getting more accustomed to coding now that you're in college, and tell us about what that mindset was. And the reason why I really asked that is, I think many people have this belief that I'm not a math person. I can't code. I didn't like computer science, and so I did chemical engineering, systems engineering. Had no, let's say, formal programming experience. My dad had a computer company growing up, so it's not to say like I never had access. I had access to any computer I could ever want in my entire life. Where people, I've listened to other stories from people who are really great software engineers, and they're like, "Oh, we had this one computer, and this is all we had." So, but now I'm like, yeah, why? I wish I went back and did computer science just to be that fundamental. But tell us about maybe some of those mental imposter syndrome thoughts that you might have gone through during the program.
Okay. It's just very interesting learning computer science because they teach you a lot of stuff that is, for most careers, irrelevant, right? It's just it's very purist in terms of what you learn, like algorithms and data structures, and a lot of these types of things are more akin to somebody like a David Fowler, for example, who's writing languages and compilers and fundamental platforms and stuff like that. But to the average software engineer, they don't need that. So a lot of people actually in industry are not computer scientists. They have other backgrounds and they've fallen into coding because coding is quite easy to pick up. If you have a analytical and logical mind, I think you have to be like a mathy person. Like I don't use a lot of math in my software engineering, but I think you have to generally not dislike math to be a coder.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but apart from that, like it's pretty straightforward. And when you get into a rhythm and you figure out and you can understand requirements and understand what your assignments are, like I have to say, like for my computer science specific courses in college, I was done with my assignments way easier and earlier than a lot of my friends as well. So that plays into the whole, like, I have a ton of free time. So, I would write my code and it would work. I would test it. And then I would sit there and drink while my friends were struggling with their fluid mechanics or whatever it was,
Yep. Because everybody had different degrees and different variations of things that they had to learn.
Yeah, and my roommates were all like very heavy into like mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, so like literal rocket scientists and stuff. So that helped as well because we had a great balance. We were able to help each other. I was able to help them with software stuff, and they were able to help me with more hardcore math and science stuff. Yes,
especially what do you call it? Not Calc 3, differential equations and all the fun stuff. So
it was fun. Diffie was actually really fun from being a coder because like I got bored with solving the equations and then just started like writing programs to do it. So using the tools that you have to make your life easier.
And did you get into that mindset of let me just code something up quick? Were you coding quite often, or you were? Okay.
Yeah, like if I was doing something repetitive, I was like, let's just automate this. And that's true today. If there's something that I have to do more than twice is too many times.
And I think that's a quality of more hardcore software engineers where they just see that pattern and they're like, okay, I need to get rid of this thing. Interesting. And
it's boring. It's boring. It's time consuming.
That makes sense. Yeah. And did you have a lot of internships during high school? I mean, during college?
I had quite a bit of internships. Well, I had some pretty good internships even before college.
I see.
In more computer networking, and so that's why like I was going more into computer engineering.
Okay.
But during college, I didn't have. Well, I had one great job on campus.
Mm-hmm.
I was a network security engineer, so I used to work with the team that was, helping in the IT department with general things. And then I eventually started working with one of the more elite teams, working on like one of my assignments was like hacking into computers on campus or seeing what the vulnerabilities were on the systems on campus. And again, one of the things I had to analyze reports. And one of the things I did is I wrote them a tool that they could just like import all the data and have a report. And, again, melding kind of multiple worlds together, system integration and stuff like that.
That makes sense. And talk to us about your experience in terms of being recruited to get to Microsoft. What was that like? I have noticed that Microsoft and Florida Tech have a pretty decent relationship, and a fair number of students from there end up going. So what was that like?
So I had one internship that I applied for, and I got flown out to Redmond. I had a series of interviews that went pretty good. The last interview I had, I can remember the question today, and the puzzle was a little challenging, and I didn't solve it quite the way that they were expecting. And my interview train kind of ended right there. And, I got told that I was not going to be getting that position.
Okay.
And then I was like, all right, cool. So, went off to do whatever I was doing at the time. And then I got a call. And they're like, well, we have another opportunity we want to, so they basically like, they have a recirculation flow. Like they don't discard you. If you're strong but you don't fit where they wanted you to fit, they may see another opportunity for you. So I was actually fed back into the system, and then I was recommended for another opportunity, which is where I ended up. So they had offered me an opportunity to come and interview with them at the same time that I was going on a Euro trip. So we were just graduating. I was going on a Euro trip with like 4 of our friends who you're familiar with. And I told my parents, which again, think back, my parents are rigid and structured. I was like, Mom, Dad, like I have this interview opportunity at Microsoft or Euro trip for a month. And my parents were like, just go. Microsoft will be here when you get back.
Whoa.
Yeah. Like, what? All right, cool. So say less. So I was gone, and I told Microsoft, hey, sorry, I can't. I'm going to be on this trip. And they're like, well, what do you think about doing a remote interview? And this is before like video calls were a thing. So it was just a phone call. One of the hiring manager, not the hiring manager, one of the interviewers called me, and one of the hiring managers. So I had a round of like 3 interviews.
Yes.
And we were actually in Italy, moving from like through the train stations and stuff. So like I'm on the phone, I'm interviewing, and they know I'm doing this. I told them like I'm doing this Euro trip. Like I don't really have time for this, but I'll squeeze it in.
Okay. Wow.
And it just so happened that it was happening while I was in transit, and I was able to conduct the interview while moving through train stations, hopping on and off trains, and they're hearing like foreign languages. I'm like answering like small like questions and asking for small directions. We moving, and that was one of the things that they're like, how are you able to maintain these threads while we're going through this? And that was, I think, one of the things that drew them to me. And they're like, listen, we love this conversation. We're gonna let you get back to doing what you're doing, and when you get back, we want to fly you out here and have some more conversations. So said, so done. And then they made me an offer, and I started.
And then that was it. Okay. And what was you were associate consultant? I see that's what you had on there. So let's talk about consulting. And one of the hypotheses that I mentioned to you before is because we're from the Caribbean, you have this multicultural background. You're naturally speaking to many different people from different cultures. So customer-facing roles tend to be more natural to us, and we tend to probably shine there, or are able to sort of carve a very deep path in that. So you want to comment on that based on your experience?
I think it's more racial than anything else, to be honest.
Okay.
I didn't mean to take you all the way over there, but if we're going to talk about it, let's just put the dead rat on the table. So what they want to do, right, is they want diversity and inclusion. That's what they really want. Like they want to see black and brown faces at their tables, and they look at us, and I'm sure you get this a lot, Mark. You're not like other black and brown people that I know. You're different. You're special. Well, I'm not Black American. I'm not African American. I am West Indian. We have a different pedigree. We have Victorian etiquette, all the things that we talked about before. So, like I said, the CXC program and all the things that we learned, we were brought up to do, prepared us for being head and shoulders above African Americans, sad to say. And I think we're recognized at that level. Now, where it gets challenging is when you look at it from a macroeconomic standpoint, where it's like, all right, well, Mark is performing better than some nondescript generic white prep kid, right? But you're disadvantaged because you didn't start from zero. You're starting with debt. You're starting with settling in a foreign country. You're settling into learning about your surroundings. So everything is more challenging for us. So we are naturally more inquisitive. We're learning a lot more. I mean, I remember like one of the first times I met with my peers who had all just been hired to do the same role that I was going to be doing. So from a technical standpoint, we're on the same ground. But from a cultural standpoint, like they're sitting there talking about what's their favorite band or what's their favorite beer or brew. The culture is completely different. And then we have to grow into that. But our stories are also interesting. And as soon as we open our mouths and we have our little accent and all this kind of stuff, people are just kind of naturally, and more pleasant, and we aim to please. Everything is man, and
just it's cool.
It's a vibe. So as long as you work hard and you deliver and you are, so there's a lot going on there. I think that's what it comes down. It has to do with how we're reared, and also like the fact that there's an opportunity where they want people that look like us. They just don't realize that we are not exactly who they hoped we would have been.
Interesting.
They hoped to have pulled somebody from a disenfranchised person into there, but we end up taking a lot of those opportunities away from them, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because someone else kind of pointed that out to me, the distinction of people of color from the Caribbean versus people of color from the US, and how maybe different roles are probably prioritized based on where you sort of come from. And within that thread, I wanted to share a story, I think, about interviewing. So did you interview at a lot of different companies before you got to Microsoft, or that was kind of like the one, and you married?
I got really lucky, man. It was just one and done. They pulled me out, they put me in, and I rode that wave. I was very successful there.
Yes.
Ton of colleagues, ton of accolades. So
and I'm happy that you sort of brought that up in terms of you stayed at Microsoft for 9 years, and oftentimes I think especially in today, the great, let's say they call it the great resignation, whatever that means, and everybody's hopping and getting big salaries, et cetera, et cetera. What mindset did you sort of enter Microsoft with? Let's maybe begin there.
It's similar to what we discussed previously, just unlimited, right? One of the things that I was telling them was like, Microsoft has unlimited resources, like more resources than I can consume. Everything is a new experience for me. At the height of my career, or towards the end of my career, like there was nothing that would surprise me. Like I'd seen so much, like I'd been so many places. I'd traveled the planet doing really cool things that people can only ever dream about doing. So, I mean, I still think that's true. Microsoft is a fantastic place to work. There's no question.
Understood. So tell us a bit more about your role. You were traveling a lot, customer facing as an associate consultant, and what were some of the things that you had to deliver for different clients?
Sure. So, I mean, the name of the business is pretty much digital transformation, right? How do we fix this process to streamline it? Which goes back to, I guess, what I was just mentioning, right? If you have to do something more than twice automated, what is the process? How do you get from point A to point B? There's a lot of paper processes. You'd be surprised how many paper processes exist for things that you thought were automated, So that's been the name of it. So, just modernization, digital transformation. So, I've worked in, at the time, Lotus to Exchange migrations, automating some of how that works. This is before it was called Office 365, like it was called like BPAWS. Like there was lots of other stuff like that, developing applications for customers. I mean, at Microsoft, I've written apps in Silverlight, which is dead.
Okay.
I've written apps in C, C++. I've written apps for Windows forms. I've written just like command line apps. Sometimes I wrote apps that were totally throwaway, just a bridge. So
yes,
it depends on what the need is. And then I've also had the opportunity to work on some really cool things that you see like on television today. Like if you're an NFL fan, you watch that game, you may notice they use Surface on the sideline. The app that's written on that Surface, I was part of the team that built that initial app. And at the time, they couldn't really figure out how to do it exactly how they did it. So that was actually, I'll tell you about that. That was a paper process. There's a guy on the field that takes a picture of the position of the players when the ball snaps. So,
yes,
right? All this guy is doing is holding the camera. There's 4 cameras at different angles on this field. There's a guy in a room with 4 screens who pushes the button right when it snaps. Then there's a printer that prints those 4 images. And then there's a guy who laminates that and puts it in a binder and then hands it to some intern kid to run down to the field and hand it to the coach so that they can draw what they want to do on it or what was wrong or how they want to do whatever. And that's the process. That's how they do that. So we created an app where they push the button, puts it on a server. It then notifies all the listeners that, hey, there's a new image, go download it. They download it, it pulls up, and then they use their pens and they write on the screen. So something like that sounds so simple and kind of expected in this day and age.
Yes.
Wasn't. It just didn't exist. So what was cool again is David. So one of the cool things that David did, which actually kind of got him to where he is today, is he saw an opportunity where there was a bunch of protocols on the open web that people would use for server to client communication.
Okay.
And then he bundled that into an easy-to-use framework that could be used in the .NET platform called SignalR. So cool. SignalR was actually the technology that we used to do that back then. So it was also cool that, I had gone to college with David. David is one of my good friends even till today. I was able to just call him up and be like, hey, can you jump on a call? So you have the product team, the guy who invented the thing, talking to the guys at the NFL with me, putting this thing together that we're going to use to revolutionize how football is played. So, that's extremely impactful, stuff like that I've worked on. I've worked on less interesting things at other high-profile companies. I've worked at NASCAR. I've worked at Home Depot, at Dell. I mean, you name it. I've gone through, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, Scottrade, you name it. Like just lots of high-profile customers that I've worked for over the years, just delivering very specific
software applications and stuff like that.
Solutions. Let's call them solutions. Right? Yeah, it's not always like a software application, right? It's a solution to a problem.
Yeah, so tell us about the consulting life. I think oftentimes when people think of consulting, or maybe what they're exposed to is you are a consultant for a big management firm. So you're probably coming in and doing more, what's the word I'm looking for? More enterprise change versus actual digital transformation. So tell us what are some criteria to make you a really good digital transformation consultant at a tech company.
Sure. So I would say that the kind of consulting that I do is really only prevalent at companies who recognize that they need to grow.
I see.
So, management consulting is pretty much brought in when things aren't going right, we need to course correct. And then you get to a point where things are going good, but then you start to realize you have inefficiencies in how you're doing your day-to-day workflows. So that's where I would come in, right? So also what's interesting, so basically I'm the guy who has been trained, who's been brought literally out of college with no experience and taught to be Microsoft expert for whatever that particular product is that you're trying to implement.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe based on the solution that you're trying to implement, I may recommend a product that you didn't even think about before. So I just kind of bring that wealth of knowledge, and I bring the know-how of how to do it properly.
Yes.
So quite often, I mean, a great example of this is SharePoint. A lot of people are familiar with SharePoint. SharePoint, until Office 365, where people didn't manage their own SharePoint anymore. When people were installing and deploying their own SharePoint farms, life was a mess. It was a disaster. Everybody did it wrong. Every single person did something wrong. You know, even a simple thing like I mentioned earlier, like Lotus Notes to Exchange migrations. Like we had a process that was failing and we couldn't figure out why. We had somebody who used to store large files, but you couldn't send large files by email. Like, you know, there's like that 10 megabyte, 8 megabyte limit. This person figured out that they could send large files in calendar invites. So like they had like gigabytes of, I mean, just stuff that you don't think about. So people will instinctively break stuff, and you have to design a solution and keep in mind that somebody's going to use it in a way that you didn't intend.
Yes.
A simple way to visualize this is like Instagram. We all are very familiar with Instagram. Instagram has a 3 picture grid. So some people build 3x3 grids, 2x3 grids, 3x3 grids. So there's like different. Imagine if Instagram changed to like add one more row. It would break everybody's page. Something like that. So, you know, basically we come in with the mindset of, all right, maybe you did it wrong. How do we bridge that gap? Is it fixable, or is it something that we need to start over? Like all of these kind of things need to be evaluated. So, you know, you over time, you eventually graduate to a point of like more analytical thinking, more broad system thinking. Of course, you're very deep in certain areas, but now you have the experience to go like across the organization and determine, all right, here's how we fix this problem. For everything. Here's how we, you know, streamline everything. And then customers can like really, and then you have to, I mean, this goes back into the sales of things. So as a consultant, you kind of always have to be selling. So it's like, all right, so our billables are going up. You're paying us more money, but look how much more money you're making, you know? So, you know, you kind of have to be that trusted partner to show them that with you and them working together, you know, it's a successful path, but you have to be on that growth mindset, because if you're not, you just see consultant billables, and then, you know, your business, you know,
not really moving.
That doesn't work.
Talk about how you balance that approach between people facing and being deeply technical. So it seems that somewhat comes kind of natural to you. I don't want to make that particular assumption, but yeah, any comments on that I think would be great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it goes back to like my ability to be, you know, kind of fun and not fun, right? It's similar to that. There's kind of in consulting, there's 2 tracks. There's a track called solution architect, and then there's a track called principal consultant.
Okay.
Principal consultants are more technical and less salesy, and solution architects are less technical and more salesy. I am more along the line of a principal architect track, where you can hire me to deliver and execute a solution, as opposed to like a solution architect who will design and sell you a solution.
Yeah, so, more or less from the scoping side, essentially, right?
Right.
That makes sense.
And I'm the guy who comes in like, okay, well, this scope is wrong, or you know, or sometimes, I mean, this is unfortunate, but sometimes like an architect can sell a solution that is just it's infeasible. So you know, now I think a lot of places are getting to a point where technology is stabilizing. We have a lot of these like cloud services. It's more obvious what works and what doesn't work. So things are getting better, but what you find is more boxed solutions. Like, here's a solution for this, you know, here's a solution for that, as opposed to before, where it's the wild, wild west, where everybody's reinventing the wheel and just kind of doing their own thing. Now everybody's streamlining software patterns to the point where a lot of these, one of the more popular like Azure cloud services is like logic apps, where you can say like, you know, I don't need to write a service that does text messaging. I can just plug in Twilio. Or, you know, I don't need to write an email service. I could just plug in, you know, Mandrill, MailChimp, or, you know, whatever you can kind of, so you can get these box solutions and then just use them and compose them to create your ecosystem of what it is that you develop, your solution. So, just having knowledge of what's out there can help, or just doing some simple research, and always kind of start by figuring out what you can use before figuring out what you need to build.
That makes sense. Yeah, and a colleague of ours, he told me once, I hadn't been programming for a long time, so I probably started learning. I made the comment, hey, I want to learn to code. He just kind of looked at me like, what the hell are you saying? And I think what he was trying to get at was you have to know what you want to build before you go sort of learn to code. And that kind of always stuck with me. Instead of just sitting down learning a language, hey, figure out kind of what you want to achieve, and then the language will sort of choose itself to some degree, right?
Correct. And I think that's what I was alluding to earlier as well, with regards to like computer science versus software engineering, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like sometimes I can say, all right, well, I can see how like my really deep knowledge of how computers work can help us to come up with a solution that maybe doesn't exist. So you still need those people, but for the most part, engineers I can kind of box that idea and hand it to an engineer, and they can execute it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I wanted to share my Microsoft story, and one of the other threads I try to re-highlight in this podcast is the value of networking. And I think to some degree, networking has different connotations to different groups of people. However, I knew you in college, and I used to look at you and I'm like, this man throwing parties, but then, he works at Microsoft. So I was very confused as to, like, this guy is supposed to be super nerdy software engineer, but he lyman in partying, he throwing parties. I'm like, how? Like, you could be both. And in seeing you do that, I think when I decided to apply for that job, I don't know did you reach out to me or did I reach out to you? I think I might have reached out to you, if I remember. And so I get the interview. So I'm like, okay, well, I get a referral. So I'm getting flown out. This is my first experience sort of getting flown out. So you're feeling good. For instance, I don't like school at all. So I was in my master's, and, as international students, you kind of have to.
But you don't like school, but you have so many
school, man.
degrees.
Bro, I hate school. Hardcore, I hate school.
You see how we could assume things about each other that are not true?
Absolutely. Yeah. If I had the opportunity to work in the US from, like, let's say 18 years old, I would never go to school. I just don't really operate well in fixed, constrained environments. I'm quite actually super hyperactive and whatnot. So school is always a big struggle, but it's something you had to do to sort of get the right to work in the US.
Right.
And so I get the interview at Microsoft. So I show up and you do the interviews. It was for a technical account manager. And that was the first time I'd kind of learned about that particular
I think you would be great at that role.
Yeah, and I think that's because of the people facing it. Just you're talking to people and understanding all the different perspectives that have things accomplished.
Right.
And so I was pretty confident that I was going to get an offer. And it never turned out. Everybody else who I thought would get an offer got it, except for myself. And that was the end of my master's. And I was like, crap, I didn't get this job. And I was super depressed. And I had an offer on the table to go into a PhD. So usually after you graduate as an international student, you have your 1 year of work experience that you can take to the market. That's like a gold ticket. And so I made the plunge to go into my PhD. But that one experience at Microsoft, there was a guy there that interviewed me, and he said, hey, you know what? Even if this doesn't work out, like my first interview at Microsoft didn't work out. And he said it took me like 5 years. He went to work and did a bunch of stuff for like 5 years and came back and got into Microsoft. And funny enough, 5 years later, I had met up with Cecil and got an interview again and got flown out. But it didn't work out. So the reason why I highlighted that story was you're going to hit certain roadblocks along the way, especially as you think about maybe getting into some of the big tech companies. And how have you sort of advised your friends who've gone, maybe not got the first love type of opportunity that you did?
Have you figured out why you didn't get the job the first time? So hard, but as you can see, I kind of changed the whole way we're having this conversation. So
yeah.
This goes into like more like a mentoring kind of space, right? So it's always about personal development, right? So so the first time you interviewed, like, so when I told you about my story, I told you why I didn't get the job.
Yes.
And that's important to me. So that the next time I have an interview like that, that won't happen to me again. The other thing is in an interview, and being a consultant, by the way, I'm interviewing constantly. I interview at least once a month because, or not once a month, but depending on how long my engagements are. Typically, engagements are like 2 to 6 months. So
Yes.
I'm interviewing like every 2 to 6 months at least.
What do you mean interviewing? Like just with the clients, you mean, or just on the
because before a client will bring you in, like they need to know,
or they need to vet you essentially.
pretty much, yeah. So
Yes.
so there's that. And so I interview pretty regularly, so that skill stays sharp. But one of the things that I try to do is just be extremely honest on what I know and what I don't know, and what my interests are and what my interests are not. So all of those things put together make for whether or not this opportunity is going to be a good fit for you as a candidate. So I don't know if you've analyzed this, but going back to your first interview, have you figured out, like, did your passions align with what it was? Were you a good technical fit? Are there things that you didn't understand that you maybe embellished upon? Stuff like that. So
yeah, I think in both instances, some of it was technical because I was a systems engineer. There was a girl who was in psychology who had actually gotten, I forget what, it was technical account manager. And then what's the other one? I think is a program manager, I believe, with kind of similar positions. And so I think the technical component was a part of it. But in addition, I think as I look back, it's that ability to really listen and answer someone's specific question. And coming back to maybe that, hey, I don't know this. And there were some things that I definitely didn't know as well, because that wasn't necessarily my background. So I think some of that had to do with it. And then my later interview at Microsoft, I think was a function of the job itself. So I was supposed to be like a developer advocate. I hadn't really sort of put myself out there, let's say on Twitter, and you're building a following, building a community, those types of things. So I think
influencers, right?
Exactly. Right. That is a prerequisite in addition to some other technical skills. So I kept a lot of those things in my pocket, put your chip on your shoulder to keep pushing forward. But I
think it's important to understand the job that you're interviewing for, right? Mm-hmm. Because even just recently, I have a friend who's a pilot, and he's a commercial pilot.
Okay.
And, he was interviewing for being I guess it's called a freight pilot or something, more like a logistics pilot. So instead of flying instead of flying people, you're flying cargo.
Yes.
When you're flying people with personalities, the objective is to get them to their destination as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
When you're flying cargo, the objective is to not lose the cargo. Right? So anyway, they were asking him a routing question and a fuel-based question. And he's like, well, if it's people, you circle. Like, I'll circle for a while and then I'll land. But in case of cargo, like, circling is bad. It's better to divert to another airport, and they have some other logistics train that can pick that up and bring it to the next place. So, even though he's a very experienced pilot, he in that moment forgot what
the context
he was interviewing for. So that's very important. You have to understand what the role is. And if you're well suited for the role and the interview is going well, it'll be very obvious to you, because the conversation tends to change pretty quickly from what do you know to how do you fit in here. So that's how I tend to gauge my interviews, and that's kind of my high level general advice, is that you have to be prepared for the job that you want, or as the kids say today, stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Yes, indeed. So let's maybe shift. So you've spent a 9-year tenure at Microsoft, and now you're sort of doing private consulting, and that's going well so far. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that shift, other than you probably not wanting to travel as much, because the traveling grind of consultants is pretty brutal, right? Were you Monday to Thursday every week?
Monday to Thursday, and unless there was like a special project which might require more time, even it was very rare that I would have an opportunity to work remote. This is, mind you, this is like 5 years ago. So these things have changed over time, especially now post-pandemic. Like, look at what's happening in our marketplace. Things are very different now than they were even a year ago. But yeah, the traveling as a young single bachelor was fantastic. Like I had company card, I could book my flights. I didn't have to go back to my home city, so I
Mm-hmm.
could go visit friends in different places in the world on the weekends as long as the costs were in line with what my normal spend was. I was executive platinum on American Airlines. I had, you know, I'm still to today I have like gold for life with Marriott. Like, so
Damn.
my vacations were paid for. I was traveling a ton. It was very cool. I mean, so the part that you think is cool are cool, right? Just being a jet setter. But the truth of the matter is, like, most of the places I consulted in were very boring and cold.
Okay. Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah.
even like being in Chicago in the winter is not fun, you know? And that's typically when these things tended to happen. I mean, one of my best projects, I was on a project in Los Angeles for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I would fly from Miami to Los Angeles every week
Oh,
for a year and a half. And
dude,
I
that's
just got into
painful.
a schedule of doing it, and it was actually fine. It was actually some of my more healthy years. What basically what I did is I just kept my body on Eastern time. So
Okay.
I would wake up early, like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Ah, I see.
I would run to the gym. I would work out for an hour. I would run back to my hotel. I'd get ready. I'd be in the office. I'd come home early. I would call back to the East Coast, because if you don't call the East Coast right at 5, remember 5 o'clock LA time is like 8 o'clock Eastern time. Any later than that, people in bed pretty much.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
you get those calls in early. Couple late nights. Of course, you're a consultant traveling with an expense account, so lots of alcohol, lots of raging. So everything that you would imagine was happening, but it also like can be just draining in certain instances where you're working on a not so fun project in a not so fun place, which happened more often than not.
Yeah.
And one of
And then you're not sleeping in your own bed, and you're in a bunch of different hotels.
Oh, that
that
doesn't
was
happen. That
okay.
didn't happen. Actually, I was pretty productive in the evenings. So, from like the hours of 5 to midnight, I got to work on, kind of my own stuff, especially like when I was, a single bachelor. But when I became more serious about family life, when I got married, it was still fine. When I had my first kid, it started to become a drag because my wife is we had established a very structured lifestyle for my daughter. And when I would get back on Thursday, it just felt like I was disrupting her flow. It just felt like, this guy is just like, he wants to play all the time or, whatever it is, as opposed to like being lockstep in what's been happening all week. And, I just kind of started to feel like an outsider in my own house, which was strange. So that was the beginning of the decline for me and like my gung-ho spirit at Microsoft, and then after my son, it just became obvious that it was time to just reevaluate things. So actually, after Microsoft and I kind of parted ways, I didn't get back into that immediately. I spent, like half a year or so just kind of focusing on my entertainment production company.
Yes.
And then, then got back into balancing that with my freelance consulting, which, is interesting, but it allows me the opportunity to be much more flexible with my schedule. So I just, basically my calendar is a blank canvas, and if it slots in, it slots in. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And
That's
whatever I need to accomplish, just make sure you hit your deadlines and everybody's happy.
Sweet. So yeah, let's talk about your event production company. And one of the things, like I said, I've kind of admired about you throughout the time that I've known you is you breaking this so-called mold of what a software engineer is, or that particular stereotype. So tell us about how you took your natural sort of inclination to have fun with friends and sort of scale that up to something that's quite interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to my natural problem solving, right? So we had a lot of fun in school, and we had, like I mentioned, we had to create our own fun. So, there was a lot of that, and, just like camaraderie and, that kind of vibe going on. Actually, I had never been to a carnival outside, and Dominica Carnival is very cultural, very not at all similar to Trinidad Carnival. Not until recently, everything is kind of trending that way. But It wasn't like pretty mass and all that stuff. It wasn't like that. It was just like street parade, street jump, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So 2011, I think, was my first introduction to Trinidad Carnival. I went with our friend from college, Kemba, and he just threw me into the deep end, and it was a whole new world. I was like, oh, this is like really fun. Oh my God. And I think what was the funnest part about it is we had gone to Florida Tech. We had our Caribbean Students Association. We had our fun. We had our conferences where you get to meet everybody. So Carnival was just like a bigger conference. And then you're seeing all your friends from all over. You didn't know who were even going to be at Randy. This is before like Instagram, right? This is when like you have Facebook. It wasn't what it was then, but I mean, you're just seeing people like, hey. It's just like gladness, just pure gladness all day long, and you're exhausted, but you can't wake up to go do it again. And that was like my introduction to that. So, I had moved to South Florida to be with my wife, and we started, our, planting roots here.
Yes.
I wasn't living here at the time. I was living in North Carolina.
Okay.
And then we played mass with this one band here in South Florida called Generation X. And they were extremely disorganized. But it was a great time on the road, but like the whole process of getting your computer and it was a mess. It was a disaster. So, I reached out to the band leaders and I'm like, well, my wife, by the way, is an event planner.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Because when I saw her at one of the parties, she was just like cracking whips. I was like, damn.
She's hardcore. She's the boss. Don't get it twisted.
Okay, now it makes a lot of sense. Okay.
So she was an organizer and planner, but she at the time she was doing weddings and corporate events and stuff like that. And she would plan anything from budgets of like 10,000 all the way up to like $500,000. So it just depends on what those projects were. And I said project, events, right? Now I look at them more like projects, right? Just like, what are we doing? What do we need to accomplish? Is this running on schedule? Stuff like that. And then that's kind of what our brand is built around today. But so we got into Generation X, and we just started helping, and we were helping to make it better every day. Okay. And then it became a grind where we had hit the ceiling of how far they were willing to go in terms of making it better. And then we just told them, hey guys, this is just too dysfunctional for us. And we kind of stepped away from it. And then we just kind of got into doing our own things. So, just from the level of detail and effort that we put into each one of these executions, we get recognized and, invited to do more and more things, which is, I have to say it's been a very interesting ride for me in particular, because Carnival and Soca and Caribbean events and stuff is very, very Trini or very, very Jamaican. And I'm neither. I'm from Dominica, as we've established. So, even today, like, I'm very proud of being from Dominica, and, I let people know that, but they're always surprised to find out that I'm not Trini, because now we have one of the most recognized brands in South Florida, and, we have global presence as well. So, people are always surprised that somebody from a small island could have that impact on
absolutely
bigger kind of thing.
And it's kind of cool that you're highlighting that people oftentimes might not realize that you're maybe not from Trinidad. And we have a friend who's from Germany, and when you hear him talk, like he talks just like a Trinidadian, and that's just from being sort of around different folks from the region, and that ability to probably
At Florida Tech, we all had we merged our accents, because we had a lot of Grenadians, a lot of Bajans, a lot of Vincentians, a lot of not so many Dominicans. I think mine was probably the weakest influence
on the overall group.
Yeah, but and not only that, but like our African friends and everything. So our accent becomes more
universal almost.
Yeah,
to some degree. Yeah.
Like listen to you.
True. That's a fair point, and I think I've almost lost in my own head what is my original accent before I came to the States and started blending.
Right now you've lost it. I'm not hearing Trini, right? But
no. I
drop you on the avenue right now. Just drop you off and hand you a Caribbean. It would come up.
Then that's true. It usually does come out, and when I'm with people that don't know me very well, they're just like, "What are you saying? I can't understand what you're saying." That's always fun. And you mentioned networking as well, and I do plan events. They're not necessarily around the social format. They're more sort of technical, et cetera, et cetera. And that has been absolutely essential in my own career progression. Can you comment on what you branching out into something that's not technology, but leveraging? I think you're leveraging a lot of your consulting skills, because you're like, hey, this is a project we have to get done. These are the building blocks of solutions we need to implement, and let's not probably reinvent the wheel here. So any comments?
No, but it's pulling all of those things together, right? Like basically, I genericized everything. It's just another generic thing. So I do also plan and host several technical type things, like
cool.
What you do as well. I've been a technical lead at Microsoft for several years. I was leading communities of people who are much more senior than myself. Pulling ideas together, pulling people together, public speaking, just putting together some bodies of work and presenting them. Being like a technical thought leader, all of those things are part of it. So, but evangelizing and spreading that is part of it as well. So, but you have to have a somewhat salesy personality for that to even work. You need to be able to charm and be connected with. So that comes a little bit more natural for me. I think, and what's interesting is growing up, I was a very, very, very shy person.
That's a big lie, because trust, I was not I would have never thought that at all.
It's true. I mean, even still today, even with like my very large events, like, we have events that are 5,000 plus people. We have events on average that, like maybe around 1,000 people or so. And I'm not the person that they recognize. Like, I'm not the front man. I'm the main person, but I'm not the one that they recognize necessarily. I'm just not. Maybe you haven't realized that, but yeah, I'm not that guy. No, I'm not. So I still am cool. Like, I'm still evolving out of my shell. I'm not really an extrovert per se.
That's quite interesting. So for all the folks that are quote unquote introvert, I think this is a fantastic example of maybe what you can evolve into, or not evolve into, but other options that are out there for you to choose from.
You can just learn to be proficient at something else, right? Similar to your question about, like, could you become a programmer or whatever, you can absolutely do whatever it is you want to do. But I think networking is like, there's nothing to me more important than networking. And something that I quite often say is, and this is quote worthy, your network is your net worth. That's Indeed. That's it. So, but being able to, land, be a cultural sponge, be able to
cultural sponge. That's
assimilate with other. Yeah. And being able to find opportunities with others, and also being solution oriented, right? Like, you may have a problem and then you might not know how to solve it. Oh, but I know somebody who does know how to solve it.
Yes.
And then you connect and boom.
And it's done. Great. So in last segment of the podcast, I just think of this as the advice level. We've kind of dove deep into your career and kind of seen all the different things that you've been able to do. Sure. What 2 pieces of advice would you give to a high schooler? Or it could be one. What 1 piece of advice would you give to a high schooler, someone in college, and a professional, in terms of your understanding of tech so far globally?
Tech specifically?
No, anything in life. Because you seem you cross many different paths as well. So
so without seeming ridiculous, I'm just gonna say something.
It's ridiculous.
So over the pandemic, we've been having a lot of these more insightful conversations and so forth. One of our fellow alumni from Florida Tech, from Africa, and I actually got together and wrote a book about that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we published the book. It's like 76 pages or so, but it's called The Immigrant Way to Wealth. And it basically it was the preface is like, this is the book I wish somebody would have handed me when I landed at JFK.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it puts together a lot of these key concepts, and a lot of it has to do with finances. Because, all of this that we're talking about is really just so that we can become middle class or better. We've come here for better. And going back to, again, the fact that the workplace is so different now. It's like now we could legitimately move home, right?
True.
Which is something that like 2 years ago was kind of unfathomable. But right now, with the way that everything is remote, we could be having this conversation from Trinidad and Dominica right now, and nobody would even know the difference. Who's to say that that's not where we are now? And we can have the same level of conversations that we have today, be just as efficient as we have today, and we could lime on the avenue in the afternoon.
Yeah, so, get all the food on doubles and everything.
Yeah, these are the opportunities. So maybe in a way, the pandemic is a blessing in disguise for the Caribbean, which I think is going through a tremendous brain drain. And that is another conversation for probably another time with maybe even a larger panel.
Yes.
But, I think that just being more focused and diligent on being ready. So again, be ready so you don't have to get ready. Your network is your net worth. And, just if you continue to network and you continue to be sharp, then you can start to demand the kinds of opportunities that you would like to have, not the ones that just kind of land in your lap. So, I have folks that I work with that I mentor and so on and so forth. And I always take time to point out to them when I decline opportunities. They're like, but this is such a good opportunity. I'm like, yeah, but this doesn't check these other boxes that we're looking to establish. And doing this is going to take time away from being able to do that. So, say no to good so you can say yes to great kind of thing, right? So, not every opportunity is a good opportunity. And for the youth as well, I think a lot of them can get tied up in a grind. Just, I'm doing this to pay my bills. You have to be able to take a step back and evaluate what's good for you and your longevity and your long-term goals. Make a 5-year plan and continuously evaluate how you're trending towards your 5-year plan. And, every year, even if your job opportunity doesn't do it properly, evaluate what you've been able to accomplish for the year. So like, I've worked at, in my, so one of the companies that I worked for recently, actually, going right into the pandemic, I was a consultant with a company and they had offered me a full-time position.
Okay.
And I accepted it right before I got on a plane and went to Congo.
Yeah.
Typical Devin, right? But then I came back to stability, right? And contingent on me accepting that opportunity was a whole bunch. It was a smaller company, but they had promised me certain opportunities within the company that, basically if you hit these metrics, you can achieve these things.
Yes.
And, they kept kind of using the pandemic as a crutch to not do those things. So, I left eventually, which is to be understandable. And also, like, I came to the conclusion that I really just love consulting more than just like being an in-house person, because now you have to deal with, other things, politics and stuff. But that's a different conversation. I think the point was that when I was leaving, even though I didn't have to do an exit evaluation, I did one.
Okay.
I started out just writing bullets, right? Not even sentences or paragraphs, just bullets of what was accomplished. And I had like 2 pages of bullets that I had submitted to my direct manager. He was like, bro,
pain.
I forgot we did all this stuff. Like,
yes.
Holy crap. How are we going to function? I was like, well, the good news is like I've automated all these things. So you don't need to do them anymore. But you're not going to continue to have that growth, right? So, but even that was eye-opening for me. Is like I was able to show them and prove to myself the value that I was able to bring to the table by evaluating my results. So, set a goal, set a stretch goal, and if you don't achieve it, great. But then, what is the aim for the stars, land on the moon kind of thing?
Absolutely. So I guess last 2 questions. What are 3, I think you kind of mentioned it, but what are 3 principles you live by? Was it those 3 that you had mentioned before in terms of advice, or what's sort of internal to you?
So networking. So your network is your net worth. Stay ready.
Stay ready.
Get ready. I'm sorry I'm making it corny, but it's just going to be easier for everybody to remember.
No, it's funny how the corny things, like you go read all these books and you come back to the same point. And humans are quite interesting that I think as life goes on and you update yourself as a person, it speaks to you in probably different parts of your life as well.
Yeah. So, stay disciplined, obviously. That goes back to like stay ready, right? One was good. You're more influential than you think.
Yeah, I really like that one. And I think even in myself doing this podcast, as I've had, the one-off conversations with many different people, but now people are reaching out saying, hey, I saw the interview on this, and it's sort of giving them a different perspective. So I think as anyone starts off on any journey, let's say you're building a podcast or doing something new, there's always this unknown about, hey, is this thing going to work? And I think maybe seeding with that every day, it's like, hey, at some point this will help someone else, and just kind of trusting that it'll come over time is cool.
But to that point, like the antithesis of that is like, maybe nobody cares, right? But maybe you just did it for you,
right?
And that's okay.
Yeah, and that's like one of my pictures behind. I started a channel and then I shut it down because I'm like, and it's interesting that you say no. It's good to know when to bow out and focus on other opportunities as well. And last question, what are 3 books you recommend? You did mention one, right? The Immigrant Way to Wealth. What would be maybe 2 more books? It could be anything. It could be technical, non-technical.
Sure. Okay, so in that book, towards the end, we actually have like a list of books that you should read. And there's 2 books that stand out that people like. One is really good. It's Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yes.
I'm sure you've heard of it. That's a great book to read. And there's another one called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Is it good? Like, I haven't gotten it yet.
Read it.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you have to lose?
I guess it's the title of the book, True Story. Yeah, I buy a lot. Clearly, you can see I have a lot of books for style, right? Perfect.
So that's 3 books, yeah. But I mean, if you read the other book, I'll send you the link to it so you can check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put it in the show notes.
It puts a lot of things in perspective, just basic stuff. Like even like this conversation, like, I'm not trying to go super deep and lose you. Like we can talk about things in a simple way that just makes sense. So, we talked about saving money, building wealth, being happy, how to, work-life balance. Work-life balance is a big one. That's another one for the tips for someone. Is like, you can't just work. You have to learn how to balance that. It's a little different for everybody else.
Right.
But you have to, find what works for you. And listen to your body and know when it's time to switch gears.
Yeah, that balance is a big thing. I'm reading this one called The Gap and the Gain right now, and that's been quite pivotal because at least when you measure your success, you're always measuring sort of in the future, and to some degree that goalpost is constantly moving, so you always get this kind of angst that, hey, I'm not achieving it or not getting there. But like you were saying, hey, write down all the things that you've sort of done along the way, and that's your real measurement.
Well, not just that, but like write down the goals, because you may have achieved the goal along the way and not even realize it.
That's a good point.
I didn't realize. One more point for everybody is please invest your money. Even if you don't want to actively trade.
Yes.
Not talking about that. Just find like S&P 500 and just put money in there. Please, just do that. Just
make it grow.
Yeah, I mean, leaving your savings in the bank at this point is archaic. That's not the way. So find Robinhood or whatever. Just put your money there. And don't touch it. Just keep adding more. If it goes down, buy more.
Buy more. Yeah. Good point. Appreciate the interview today, and thanks for sharing a lot of the perspectives. It sounds like we have a couple more deeper conversations to have on different topics. So I'll definitely pull you back in for some of those.
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it. Vibes. Easy.